Hi, Zodwa, and thank you so much for making the works available for Tactile Visions Woven. It's really wonderful to engage your project with the Nomzamo Old Age Group for the exhibition. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for including us into the exhibition.
So can you introduce yourself to an audience who is not familiar with you and your work as a curator?
Okay, so I'm Zodwa Skeyi Tutani. I'm a curator. And so my work that is being presented on the exhibition comes from my master's research called Zundikondi's System, Reclaiming Our Voice. So the work is looking at curating Eastern Cape tactile art in ways that includes the voices of the artists that I'm working with, and also presenting the work from their perspective instead of just using display what you call this display techniques, that the usual display techniques where they are not usually involved in the display work, or they've spoken for most of the time instead of being allowed to speak of their work for themselves. And then also, as another thing that I was thinking of is me as a curator being involved in the process of actually producing the work, because the process then informs, it's like a long-term process that involves me knowing about the work from start to end, and then being able to present it in ways that are informed by the process, by the conversations with the artists, and by actually being part of the working, the actual working of the work, and then the actual, and then them being part of my techniques in displaying the work in terms of the curatorial work. So the work was broken up into 3 exhibitions, so that, again, involving the artist in the process of the curatorial work. So doing the 3 exhibitions meant that exhibition 1 was the tryout exhibition, where we worked together making the work, and then we worked together presenting the work. And then we learned from that experience, so that the next exhibition, we kind of incorporate whatever learning experiences that we had from that first exhibition. And so then the final one, which is the 3rd one, was when then all our findings, me, myself, the curator, and then the artists themselves as well. And that was basically the whole result of both our researchers, myself as the curator, and then the artists themselves, basically.
Great. Thank you very much. Can you tell us a little bit more about the works that are on display at Tactile Visions Woven, speaking to some of the choices that the various artists have made?
Okay, so the work, initially the women were working at Nomzamo Old Age Center, making wearable beadwork, right? And so then me trying to incorporate their voices in the work, we then discussed the creation of the work, in including the stories that they that basically are involved during the making of the bead. And so we decided then that instead of the wearable beadwork, are there other ways that they could speak through beadwork? And so then one of the ways was what they always do every time they're there, is tell each other stories, tell their grandchildren stories. Most of them's grandchildren dropped off by these transports that come from school. So the kids get dropped off at Mnyumzamo Old Age Center. And then so from 2 to 4, they have these children there so that they can go home with them later. And so what they do is they exchange stories with them while they're eating and playing. And so I thought, okay, so that's another way of, that's incorporated in the actual beadworking and the making of the wearable beads. And then the way that they teach the children, what are these wearable beads and what are they for? How do they connect with the isiXhosa culture? right? And so we took those stories and we incorporated them in the work so that they are able to tell stories by themselves as artworks on the wall or in an exhibition. And then we use the works, so as inspiration, we looked at works by Unongenile Mastatu Zenani, who was a storyteller from the Eastern Cape during the 1960s. And then we used Nonsi Zimkweto's poetry as some of the inspiration for our work, and then Simphiwe Dana's music, which all three of them possess the poetic storytelling techniques of the region, the Eastern Cape. And so all three of them are artists who were born in the Eastern Cape and have been, what do you call it, have been influenced. Most of the work have been influenced by actually sitting with grandmothers and listening to stories. And so because they are also grandmothers who tell stories themselves, we decided to incorporate all of that into the beadwork, and then let the beadwork be the storytellers on the walls of for the exhibitions. I think, yes.
And one of the participants, one of the artists, is actually your grandmom as well.
Sorry?
One of the participants is your grandmom as well.
Yes, she was actually the initial inspiration for what I am doing, because she, when she retired, she became I was joking with her and saying, wow, you're becoming a grandmother, like literally telling stories, remembering things from the olden days and being able to retell. So if you drive by a certain spot, she'll say, oh, this is where we used to blah, blah, blah. This is where we used to do this. This is how it looked in those days. So she would like to describe the places and tell a story about the different places within the Eastern Cape. And so my work is kind of derived from those conversations as well, where she's able to describe the space in the now and in the past to me, and then I'm able to reimagine what it would be to have a reimagined art presentation from the Eastern Cape that is informed by both the past and the present. Yeah, basically, and also her keenness to leave some sort of legacy, I mean, she's just a retired lady who worked at a clothing shop all her life, but the wealth of the legacy that she leaves through stories was what really inspired me to actually just want to sit with more of her friends who I mean, she just joined the beadworking group, which is why I went that direction. And so to listen to them while beading and talking about their lives, talking about not just their lives, but also the spaces that they grew up in, that they raised their children in, that they retired in, spaces that they worked in, and how those spaces have affected really contemporary life within the Eastern Cape, whether it's by their children or grandchildren, our generation. And so I wanted for them to create a conversation through art to the next generation, if I may say so, on how, what are they thinking and what are they leaving behind? Yeah, type of thing.
And this aspect of storytelling and generational legacies, women's generational legacies, is really important to you, because you've been tracing that through the work of Nonzisi, right? And her ability to want to be an mbongi, which was
Yes.
a traditionally male role, and in a
Yes.
way you've now you're now wanting to be a little bit of a mbongi yourself, because you've also now you're pursuing poetry yourself through a creative MA as well, because you're so captivated by stories, but also the kinds of the wealth of women's legacies in the region, through the everyday actions of women in trying to change the family paths of women. And I'm that story you once told me of a grandmother who saved for her family's education by putting money under a rock so that people wouldn't know where that money was, but that the fact that she saved money under a rock for children's education, just stays with me. Can you speak to some of that?
Yeah, so again, taking from my grandmother and my own upbringing, and I mean, the women that I work with are women that I actually know. They're part of my grandmother's group. But what is fascinating about each and every one of them, their stories, I mean, I know some of their children and some of their grandchildren, is how most of them have had to educate their children under really, under a lot of struggle in terms of financially. And so the kinds of ways that they dealt with that was for me so beautiful, in that the little that you had, right, you were able to hide under a rock. That would, I mean, it seems like such a small, crazy act, but if you look at it over time, that woman educated 4 girls, and they are all now teachers and nurses. And that for her was unimaginable at the time. So the idea that you are a domestic worker with so little money and you have to educate these girls, and to do that, you take little money every week or every month and you put it under a rock. For the first month, it must have been so unimaginable. But over years, what that has done is absolutely phenomenal. And also just the resilience of having to be consistent all the time with this goal, that this is what you have, this is all that you have, right? But also the other little stories where even the idea that they rally together, whether it's through church, whether it's through just community stock fells, but the idea that nobody goes without, those little stories, myself as well as a baby, because I mean, I had to be looked after. And how that turned out was that every day I had to be dropped off at someone's house as a baby because everybody had to work. And so that idea of that communal raising of a baby, where you have literally been raised in so many different homes in the same space, I wanted to capture those little stories, those little communal togetherness stories that make up a community over time. And that when you look at it now as an adult, you think of all those little stories sewn together have created where we are today, where we have created the fact that I can be here now speaking to you, a student at Rhodes University, which at that time they would never have imagined. And on that first day that they put the money underneath the rock, they would never have imagined this, So those are the kind of stories that I draw from and we talk about, and I like to think we weave into the beadwork so that it tells so much more than just beadwork as a cultural object that makes you identify with your culture, but also it like Kununzizi, wanting to say so much more, so that you have to find another platform to be able to say it in a different way. So that's where the work comes from.
Yeah, and and I think that's so important. The ways in which you are creating and collaborating, because the stigma of the craft industry, right, still remains. This craft industry that continues this voicelessness, this anonymity of African Black women in this country, that creates this collective anonymity and voicelessness, and we see these objects, and I think about how it really takes special people to pull out this idea of the mute always speaking, right? Because these objects are infused with the memory, and this is what you and so many people who are in this exhibition, like Piliswa and stuff, and Mary are telling us that all of these fabrics, that all of these beads, that all of these colors, they are telling us something about the makers, of the producers of these art objects. That the very memory of the makers are infused into these works, and so to reduce it to just simple exterior aesthetics is to deny us as much as we're denying the makers of these arts as well. So it's poverty on both sides of the core of this coin, right? And I think your practice is collaborative from one end right up until the end, right? Where the makers the artists are there at the opening. They're part of the works. They're enjoying. They're also there's musicians because they value the music at the openings. Art exhibitions are not supposed to have music at the openings, but the community wants music at the openings because this is what the openings are supposed to be like.
This is what they're supposed to be. The openings, I mean, in the traditional sense, if I may say, it's a storytelling session. So for them to have that, to have the music, and to also incorporate a storyteller. I worked with a storyteller as well, where she's able to pull out the images during the opening and actually make them alive through storytelling, through the audience engaging in the storytelling sessions. And so it really becomes sitting around the fire again and listening to grandmother telling you a story as an exhibition opening. So I thought it was phenomenal in that way, that they were involved right throughout, even the preparation, everything. So it then the end product of it became like a storytelling session, as it should, So definitely.
As a final question, can you also speak to some of the choices in how the works are created, because the combinations are quite unusual in terms of what we've come to expect. So we have what seems to be traditional necklaces, but then they're placed and they're made onto reed mats. And then we have sort of the embroidery that are then made into framed wall pieces. So there's very unusual combinations of beads, mats, and so I guess the audience might be wondering, are these combinations particular to the region, or have these combinations come about through the particularities of the conversations of this project?
So basically the works. So we've basically deconstructed the attire of a Xhosa woman. So all the beadwork that you do, the necklaces and all of that, and we've taken those into, like, we've basically put it apart and then talked about how do we tell stories through them. So the images that are black on beadwork on black, those ones were the actual duk, the big duk that Xhosa women wear on their heads. So we took that and we laid it out on the floor, and we spoke about what are the ways of telling a story through a duk, right? And so then we spoke about it. We had the beads on the floor. We talked about how would a woman tell a story using this duk, because it's so significant on the woman's body, and also it signifies the stage in which the woman is, like what age is she? You see by the basically the largeness of the duk. And so those were made from head wraps and beadwork. So we deconstructed the necklaces as well, and we put those beads onto the beadwork by telling stories, because often the stories are about land, about agriculture, about just community. And those three things are infused in all of the works continually. If you listen to Insomi, which is a story, it always incorporates land, agriculture, and community. And so those were the things that the Duk then represented. And then the reed mats are trays that Xhosa people used before the arrival of trays. And so that's what you would use to present food, to present anything to a person of, I don't know, distinguished manner. And so again, this idea of presenting you with these legacies was what inspired the art, the beadwork on the reed mat. So it's literally giving you the legacy on a tray, basically. And so we had fun just deconstructing all of these cultural Eastern Cape objects into things that will say, here is our legacy on a tray for you to do as you please with, right? And then also the embroidery is what they were taught in school. They went to missionary schools growing up, and they were taught how to embroider. And so that became part of the beadwork process. So just having been taught at home how to make beadwork, then you go to school and you're taught how to do embroidery. And so they actually some of the time incorporate the two, school and being taught by your grandmother, on the floor. And so those two combinations also they kind of put together and created a embroidery with beadwork. And so we've taken all of these aspects of them growing up, the Xhosa women's attire, things like reed mats, and we've tried to reimagine them into a telling of their legacy, basically.
Zodwa, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the gift of this amazing project. Thank you very much for the gift of your scholarship with Manzizi. You also have the amazing collaborative kind of project that you're engaging with Skumbuza Makandula around Tiasoga as well. And thank you for making this available for Tactile Visions Woven, and also just for having this conversation with me as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the platform as well. Highly, highly appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you.